Well, I want to welcome you back today to the GLBC Connections as we talk our way through the Psalms. Today we want to talk about Psalm 63. As we introduce Psalm 63 in the subject matter, I want to talk about a young man I knew really quite some time ago. He was just an acquaintance of mine. I don't remember the exact circumstances under which we met. But over time I got to know him, and he went through a very difficult time in his marriage. It fell apart. He was young. She was young. As he went through it, he cried out and poured his heart out to God. He didn't understand. It was a very difficult time for him. And, just really, even for me, it was just hard to watch because I knew he was frustrated. There just wasn't much I could do for it. Things like that, I think, in the Bible sometimes are referred to as times in the wilderness. The Bible uses the wilderness as a metaphor for the things that we often experience, and we can think of all the times that the wilderness comes into play. Israel wandered through the wilderness because of their sin against God, not trusting in Him, and because of that, they spent 40 years in the wilderness. Jesus spent 40 days in the wilderness. And for both of them, the wilderness was a place of privation and hardship. Well, today's Psalm 63, we see that David himself, King David, also spent time in the wilderness. And in this case, it was not through any fault of his own. It was because of other people and the things they had done in his life, just much like this young man. And so as we look at Psalm 63, I want to read just a little bit of it to you. This is Psalm 63 verse 1 is a psalm of David when he spent time in the wilderness, probably fleeing from Absalom. He writes, "You, God, are my God. Earnestly I seek you. I thirst for you. My whole being longs for you in a dry and parched land where there is no water." What great words that he writes here, that his whole being longs for God in a place where there is no water. That is, that David makes the connection between what is in his soul and what is true in reality around him. His soul is thirsty. His soul is hungry. He is desperate for something. And he recognizes that that something can only be filled and found in his worship of God and in the presence of God. And so even as he is in a difficult situation, says David, I cry out for you, God, because this is difficult. One of the things that encouraged me about the young man as we spoke was his heart was for turning toward God, and he desired that, and he would read Psalms, and I would give him things to read, and as he read them, I hope he was encouraged, and oftentimes he said he was, other times, honestly, he wasn't, because it was such a difficult and challenging time. King David continues to write, "I have seen you in the sanctuary and beheld your power and your glory. Because your love is better than life, my lips will glorify you. I will praise you as long as I live. In your name I will lift up my hands. I will be fully satisfied as with the richest of foods. With singing lips my mouth will praise you." And notice what David does here as he turns the psalm toward God. He says, in the end, he is satisfied by God, that as he looks to God, that is where his satisfaction is found. And so, even in the midst of the time in the desert, he says, I can give you praise. Your love is better than life. You really do, Lord. You really do satisfy. That's, I think, an important lesson for us to learn. All of us in a broken world eventually go through times where we will walk through the wilderness. It could be grief, can be loneliness, could be job loss, could be the loss of a relationship, as this young man experienced. And yet, we know this, that the Lord satisfies. The young man eventually said to me he was going to leave where he was living at that time. He was going to move off someplace else. I asked him why he was going to do that. I was actually concerned about that. I was afraid he was going to run from one area of wilderness to another. But he said to me, no, I need to get a fresh start, both for myself and with God. I was really encouraged by that. I lost track of him after that. I don't know what happened, but genuinely hope that as he searched and as he moved into his new location, that his relationship with Jesus Christ was refreshed and renewed, and that he really did get this soul-satisfying fullness that God promises in Psalm 63. I want to say that to you too. First of all, if you're going through a time in the wilderness right now, just to encourage you that your relationship with Jesus Christ really in the end is all that satisfies. So often in the midst of the wilderness, we turn to other things, entertainment, money, success, jobs, whatever. We try all kinds of things to fill that space in our lives, that dry place, that place of thirst and hunger. But it doesn't work. So if you're going through it right now, I encourage you, turn entirely and completely to Jesus Christ. And secondly, I just want to say, even if you're not going through it right now, someday you will. And when you do, I want you to remember Psalm 63 and turn to it and remind yourself that Jesus Christ is worthy of praise even when we are in the desert. Even when we go through the wilderness, Jesus Christ is worthy of praise because he fills us. He fulfills that space, that thirst, that hunger in a dry and thirsty land. And make no mistake, the world is a dry and thirsty place. And truly in the end, the only place to find satisfaction is in Jesus Christ. Thanks for joining us today. I hope you'll read the psalm in its entirety, see it unfold as David writes it, and see what a great, wonderful, beautiful psalm that it is.